Boundaries are essential to our emotional and mental well-being, as well as contribute to the development of healthy relationships. Now, a very commonly used definition of boundaries is that boundaries are the invisible line that indicate where you end and another person begins. And that does apply. I think that's a reasonable definition, specifically when we're talking about physical boundaries. It could apply to some of the others, but definitely physical. But I want to expand your perspective to see that boundaries exist and apply to other areas of how we move through the world, such as our emotions, our time, our energy, our finances, as well as sexual encounters. Now, boundaries, the way I conceptualize it, is what we need. It's commitments that we make with ourselves and kind of enforce in the world around us that allow us to be safe, to be regulated, to feel seen, to feel respected, and to feel loved. Now, those last three really show up in your relationships to be seen, respected, and loved. But the safe and regulated, that applies to all of the areas of boundary. So, what do you need to feel safe and regulated physically, emotionally, financially, sexually? So, these boundaries are agreements and commitments that we make. Now, quick little reminder, boundaries are not about what other people are going to do. It is about what we are going to do and how we are going to honor our need for safety and for regulation. When we're looking at boundaries with sources that are not relational, as in it's not us interacting with another person, the boundaries still apply to like media or things that we consume, like food and drink. But I want to bring your attention to media and applying this idea or this concept of boundaries around media. Because anything that we consume, anything that we bring into our system has the capacity to impact and influence our system. And if boundaries are what we need, commitments we make so that we can feel safe and regulated, how we engage and how we consume media is important because we live in a time where we have a 24-hour news cycle where media is accessible to us at our fingertips, on our TVs, on our laptops and desktops, on our cell phones. We have access to media more easily and more quickly and from more sources than ever before. And when that's the case, we can get overstimulated pretty easily. And because we have a 24-hour news cycle and media and social media feeds don't ever have like an end, like you don't get to like, you've reached the end of this feed, it just keeps going and going and going. It means that it's really on us to set, to create, to honor our boundaries around the consumption of this information. Now, I put a little bit of emphasis on honor because boundaries are not arbitrary. We aren't just deciding that something is a boundary. Our body generally lets us know that something is a boundary or that we need to have a boundary or that we have moved beyond a boundary. And it requires us to be connected to our body and to be curious when our body responds to something that we don't immediately say, danger, red, do not enter, but that we pause and say, oh, what was that? What did I respond to? What is happening in my environment that activated that response in me, and be curious. And then that we respond to that information, that insight that we gain from that inquiry, and maybe create a boundary. So coming back to boundaries around media, because we live in a time where the media is everywhere, it's up to us to set boundaries, especially in this current climate where there's a lot of information and there's a lot of polarization in the media. We need to have boundaries. There can be temptations to just say, I'm going to just step away. Like, I'm not watching the news. I'm not going on social media. If I deleted all my accounts, I'm just going to read my book, drink my water, and mind my business. I mean, that's an option, right? And I think that you can do that and that there's a lot of benefit in that. Avoidance is a coping strategy. Avoidance is not usually a healing strategy. Avoidance puts a lot of power on the thing that you're avoiding because you don't build up a tolerance. You don't build up resources to be able to respond to whatever that thing is that is triggering or activating. So just cutting off completely from the news and the media, it'll give you some temporary relief. It might put you at risk for being uninformed, and being uninformed could have a ripple effect in areas of your life that we don't even know. So rather than just going the avoidance cutoff route, I want to invite you to create boundaries around your consumption of media and information. That will help you to engage in sensory and mental rest by having boundaries around your consumption, but also to regulate your nervous system. Now, as you're setting these boundaries, I encourage you to think of what you're consuming, where and how you're consuming it, like the media specifically, when you are consuming it, how long you're consuming it, and what you're doing to care for yourself before, after, and during consuming it. So example, if you are a news watcher, like I watch the news most nights, I might not for the foreseeable future, I'll have to make some adjustments, but I typically watch the news in the evening. You might want to decide, oh, you know what, watching the news right when I get home from work is not really a good time because I just want to unwind, I want to de-stress, and I'm not prepared to like take in all of that information. So maybe that's not a good time for you to watch the news. Maybe you watch the news right before bed. And if that works for you, then keep doing it. But if you find that your sleep is disrupted when you watch the news right before bed, maybe you choose to watch the news a different time because, oh, by the way, sleep hygiene is one of the single most effective things you can do for your health and your mental health. And so anything that is disrupting your sleep, if you can address that, if you can resolve that, you will be doing yourself such a service. So coming back, when you consume, is it at the beginning of the day? Is it at the end of the day? Is it right after your work day? You get to decide what works better, maybe not best, but better for you. How you are consuming this information. Is it on the TV? Is it on your phone? Is it through a podcast or listening it through your, like a device that you have? Because some people might be activated or triggered by seeing the imagery that accompanies news stories. So if that's you, then maybe you don't watch the news, but you listen to the news or you read the news. But you learn what's going to help you to stay informed because that may be important to you, but also stay regulated when you are consuming it and maybe even motivated to take action if there's action that needs to be taken. How long you consume is another boundary you can set because we have a 24-hour news cycle. You could put on the news and it'll be on all day long. From the time you wake up, you can click it on and it stays on all day to the time you click it off. And then you're just inundated. And maybe it turns into background noise, but you get to decide what helps you stay connected, but not be so consumed by it that you're actually disconnected. Maybe it's only an hour, maybe it's only 15 minutes, but that's a boundary. When you decide what works for you, I want you to be mindful and I want you to be curious that what works for you on Monday may not work for you on Wednesday. Or there may be certain parts of the news that is more activating and that you have to have different boundaries around. Whatever you are doing, this is a learning process. You are learning yourself in some ways, as well as you are honoring what you already know about yourself. Now, with these boundaries, they're not fixed, like they're not in stone. They might fluctuate depending on how you're doing. So your emotional state, again, being connected with yourself and checking in and say, am I even in a place or a space to receive? Am I good ground for a seed to be planted in? And if I'm not, then I care for myself in whatever ways I need, and I maybe don't consume the media. However you approach it, I want you to view media and your relationship with it as another place where you can practice and you can enforce boundaries, which requires self-awareness, self-compassion, and self-regulation.